Still squirreling those nuts.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Raw CrossFit Podcast.
I am joined by my co-host, Michael Ween. Tonight, we are continuing our NFL preview series with our number 6 and number 5 teams. But before we get into all that, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below as well. That helps. All that stuff helps with the algorithm, helps us push this out to more people, out more sports fans. But before we get into it, I got to introduce my co-host, Michael. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm good. We're a little over 12 hours away from real football being played at the college level. So I'm doing fantastic. Tonight, got to watch some high school football. High school football's back. Watched 2026 Texas quarterback commit Dia Bell on ESPN tonight. So I got a good look at him. Big recruiting weekend. There should be some big news tomorrow. I'll be live tomorrow night, most likely, with the recruiting show. But excited to talk about these two teams. And then at the end, I have a couple NFL buy or sells for you that I want to ask you related to the preseason.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Did you want to start with the buy or sell stuff, or did you want to just get right into this these previews?
No, let's go ahead and jump into the previews. That's the most important thing.
All right. I'll let you. All right, the floor is yours, man. Go ahead and explain our 16.
Our number 6 team is the Houston Texans, and no AFC team last year took a bigger jump than the Houston Texans did. They went from 3-13 2 years ago in 2022 to a 10-7 team and a wild card win last year over the Cleveland Browns, a game which they played in Houston. And it was really about 2 or 3 things for the Texans, in my opinion, last year. Number one, they got the coach right, D'Amico Ryans. I think we know that by now. He proved how good he actually is, bringing over, Bobby Slowick as an offensive coordinator. They got the coach right. They obviously got the quarterback right in C.J. Stroud, who was fantastic last year. And they hit big in the draft. I mean, Derek Stingley Jr. really emerged at the end of the year. He's supposed to be their number 1 corner this year, one of the best players on their defense. And Will Anderson Jr., emerged as the defensive rookie of the year last year. So they hit big in the draft. They get the coach and the quarterback right. And finally, the Houston Texans, once you can do those 2 things as a franchise, you can contend. And they went out and they were aggressive in the offseason. So I'm excited to talk about that. But very good season a year ago for the Texans.
Yeah, huge. I mean, you mentioned it. head coach, quarterback, and it seems like they also have their GM correct as well. I think you could argue that trading up and getting Will Anderson after drafting CJ Stroud in succession like that, that might just be one of the best first rounds we've seen in a long, long time, man. Will Anderson Jr. has a chance to be a perennial defensive player of the year candidate, and he proved that last year. And so you got to give Nick Caserio credit as well.
Absolutely. Now, before we talk about this offseason for the Texans, I just wanted to mention this AFC South division. I don't know what we're going to call it this year, but it's going to be the division of young quarterbacks. You're talking about CJ Stroud at 22 years old going into his second season. Anthony Richardson, 22 years old, who barely played last year in his rookie season due to injuries. Will Levis, who's a little bit older, but he's the elder statesman in the division at 25 years old. And then Trevor Lawrence at 24, 25 years old. It's a young quarterback, bright future kind of division. And they're going to be competing with the likes of the Colts, who we talked about earlier in this power rankings countdown, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who we've already talked about as well in this AFC South division. So we'll talk about the outlook here in a little bit. But before we do that, we have to talk about what the Texans did to improve in the offseason. So, Emmy Nixon, I'll let you start us off here with your favorite offseason additions for the Texans.
Well, first, you got to mention the trade they made to get Stephon Diggs. I think it was for a fourth round pick or something like that. Pretty easy to see. That's one of the best moves of the offseason. The value that you're going to get, even with Diggs on a 1-year deal, to have him as arguably your wide receiver 3, probably more likely he's the wide receiver 2, depending on how you look at it. But regardless, now you have one of the most talented wide receiver trios in football to go along with a really solid tight end in Dalton Schultz, a young O-line that's kind of, I wouldn't describe them as ascending just yet, but I would describe them as solid, at the very least. So I think getting Stephon Diggs solidifies his offense as one of the best in football. On the other side, I really liked the move to go get Danielle Hunter to be opposite Will Anderson. Will Anderson's kind of that skinnier speed rusher type of build. Danielle Hunter is more of that like physical freak that's going to win with power. And I think that contrast is good to have. We talked about that a little bit with wide receivers. Like you want to have differing skill sets, but I feel like in terms of edge rushers, you want to have guys that can win in different ways.
Yes, our lists are very, very similar. I had the same two guys as you, and I added in Joe Mixon. I think Mixon's more talented than Singletary, who they had last year. I think he's more talented than Dameon Pierce. He was the workhorse for the Bengals last year, carrying the load on almost 81% of Cincinnati's backfield rushes. He accounted for a league high 79% of backfield touches overall. He's a workhorse at running back. I believe he has 1,200 yards in consecutive seasons. Really like what he's going to add, not only in the running game but in the passing game. I'm not sure what they landed him in a trade. I don't know what his contract situation is, but he's a downhill runner with some wiggle, sound pass catching skills for CJ Stroud out of the backfield. He has 30 rushing touchdowns in the past 3 years. So I think that is huge for a Texans running game that's kind of been, before last year, was kind of a missing element to their offense. I have to find their rankings in rushing, but I know they weren't great. So I like that. Diggs obviously has been one of the best receivers in the NFL for years now. You need weapons in this league. He led the NFL in catches um, among receivers the past 4 seasons. And he makes this receiving core not only one of the most talented in the AFC, but one of the deepest receiving cores in the entire league. You're talking about Stephon Diggs, uh, Collins, Tank Dell, who's coming off an injury. I think they still have John Mechie. They have Dalton Schultz, as you mentioned. They have Robert Woods. It's an extremely deep wide receiver room. And then obviously, I love going out and getting Daniil Hunter. I have some numbers on Hunter right here. They obviously kind of traded places with the Vikings. Jonathan Grenard, who played for the Texans a year ago, goes to the Vikings. They bring in Daniil Hunter to play opposite Will Anderson. He's coming off a 16 and a half sack season with the Vikings, and he logged a 13.4% pressure rate on his pass rush snaps, which isn't elite, but it's an upgrade over what Jonathan Grenard provided them a year ago. So those are my 3 favorite offseason additions. But those are the 3 that I think come to my mind first, but I'm sure there are others. They had a bunch of picks in the draft. I also liked going out and getting Kamari Lassiter from, I think, Georgia in the
Yeah,
second round of the
Georgia.
draft. He's competing for a starting spot in their secondary. So good offseason, good aggressive offseason for Nick Caserio.
Yeah, and the Aziz Al-Shair pickup, I think it's not an upgrade because of how good Blake Cashman was last year, but in terms of familiarity with the system with D'Amico Ryans from his time in San Francisco, I think at the very least it's neutral, which is good because that's really good linebacker play that they got out of Blake Cashman last year. And ultimately, I think it's good that they were so aggressive on the defensive side because I think that's the side of the ball that's ultimately going to decide how far this team is going to go. We pretty much know what the offense is.
Yeah. Talk about that trio of Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. Nico Collins was a guy who made a significant jump last year, catching 80 passes for almost 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns in 15 games in the regular season. So you have him as your number 2, and then Tank Dell as your number 3. Tank Dell was third amongst rookies last year in yards per route run, only behind Puka Nacua and Rashee Rice. So when all 3 of those guys are on the field and you've got Joe Mixon in the backfield, if this offensive line gives CJ Stroud the protection that he needs, good luck stopping this offense.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually do think by season's end, Nico Collins will be the number 1 wide receiver. But I think either
Interesting.
way, like
Yeah.
you're just in such a good spot. And if any one of those guys goes down with injury, you still have Noah Brown and guys like that with experience behind that. So
Yeah.
this team's in a really good spot.
If you get into a situation where Stephon Diggs isn't your number 1 receiver,
Yeah.
you're
Then you're
you're really in a good situation.
yeah.
Um, okay. Anything else on the Texans offseason? I know they
Um,
went out and added Al-Shair at linebacker. They had a lot to replace on the defensive line. They'd go out and get Danico Autry. Um,
Foley Fadukasi, Tim
yep,
Settle.
yep. Anything else you want to mention? They also had Jeff Okuda uh, in the secondary. Anything else?
Well, I was going to talk about the secondary a little bit, but I'm going to save it for the X Factor portion.
Yeah, let's just jump into the X factors then, because the secondary is a big talking point here. So why don't you just go ahead and share what you wanted to say about the Texans
Yeah,
secondary?
yeah. For the secondary, I had 3 names written down as guys that one need to stay healthy, and two, like I just think they gotta step up to the plate right away because this team is going to be relying on them, and that's Kamari Lassiter, Jeff Okudah, and C.J. Henderson. I'll start with Okudah because last year it wasn't great in Atlanta. He kind of has been struggling in terms of at the quarterback position in terms of like route stickiness. Like when the wide receiver leaves his break, Okuda isn't able to match the quickness usually, and that's been the big struggle with him. The hope is with D'Amico Ryan's system of a little bit more of cover four, eyes on the quarterback, that kind of um, ability to play the football will show up again. So that's the hope. And then CJ Henderson, another first round pick that kind of didn't pan out. He hasn't really shown a whole lot in the NFL so far. So really you're looking at Kamari Lassiter. Right now he's listed as the cornerback opposite of Derek Stingley Jr., who we already know how good he is, but he's also been injury prone. So those are the three guys that I look at that if Derek Stingley misses time, have to play well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I also think safety is kind of full of questions for them. Their second round pick back in 2022, Jalen Petrie, hasn't been terrible. 32 games over his first two seasons, but hasn't really stood out. He struggled in play action a year ago. They have Jimmy Ward, who played 10 games last year, but is going to be 33 going into this season and has a long injury history. It's just not – there's not a whole lot of proven guys behind those two. So I have some questions in the secondary as a whole, specifically at safety, but it really, to me, comes down to Kamari Lassiter. If he emerges right away as the guy opposite Derek Stingley Jr., then they'll be okay.
Yeah.
I guess something else you might want to throw out defensively, which I don't worry about as much just because I love what they have on the edge. But you are having to replace – you're replacing who are they replacing on their defensive line? I can't remember their names, but they bring in Danico Autry. They bring in Fatou Kassi. They bring in Tim Settle. They have Mario Edwards. Those are all new additions. This was a Texans team that allowed 3.3 yards per running back carry last year, which was first in the NFL. And they finished second in yards before contact allowed against running backs last year. Who are they replacing? I can't remember. Why am I blanking on their names? They were Malik Collins and Malik Collins, help me here. Who was the other guy? Sheldon Rankins. Malik Collins and Sheldon Rankins on that defensive line were really good a year ago against the run. I've watched some Texans preseason, and the defensive line looks good. It looks like a strength, but it is the preseason. So maybe it's not so much an X factor, but it's something I'm watching for. Right. Is that interior defensive line against the run for the Texans, because it was really good a year ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else on the offensive side? I think Tank Dell's a big X factor, because I think you know what you're going to get from Malik Collins. I think I know what I'm going to get from Diggs. But I think Tank Dell, just being kind of that riveting rookie who started his career with 709 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns before that left leg injury in week 13 ended his season. If he's he could end up being one of the best number 3 wide receivers in football if he can build off that.
Yeah. Another thing I'll add is Kenyon Green just bad. I'm not sure yet. We're still the jury is still out on him, but thus far it's been pretty shaky. They did draft Blake Fisher in the third round as a swing tackle, but could they possibly move him into guard? Could they move Kendrick Green up?
Oh yeah,
There's still some questions right there on that interior offensive line.
goodness, I forgot they have. Okay, whatever. Is it Kendrick Green that they have? Because if it's Kendrick Green,
Well,
that's
they have okay, so they have Kenyon Green, their first round pick from I think it was 2021, I want to say.
yeah.
Um, and he's been kind of shaky thus far in his career. He's out of Texas A&M, and then Kendrick Green is kind of their backup guard. He's listed as their backup guard.
Oh God, I think health for the Texans' offensive line is key because Kendrick Green, man, he's
Mm.
yeah. Uh, remember last year, this offensive line was really the worry of the team, going into the season because they started the year with 4 of their 5 projected offensive line starters
Injured,
out due to
yeah.
injury. So, D'Amico Ryans had an amazing quote when he was asked about that. I'm not going to read it, but just sitting with, I think not completely falling apart due to those injuries. Sitting at 1 and 2, getting some of those guys back, really probably allowed the Texans to do what they did to a certain degree. But is that all for X factors? Can we get into our over under
So yeah,
projection?
let's
Okay.
get into it.
What is the over under for Houston? Do you
I
know?
think it's at 9.5.
Okay. That's what I have on my end. So, what are you thinking?
Um, I think a lot of people look at it and say like, oh, they have CJ Stroud and Will Anderson as second year guys looking to kind of ascend, and they made all these moves. They're obviously going to get better. Like they won 10 games last year with a worse team. That's what people will say, but it's not that simple. I think if you look at their schedule, this is a tougher schedule,
Yeah.
and I do look at their depth and think if a few key guys go down, their defense all of a sudden could look a lot worse, especially in that cornerback and safety room. So I have them hitting the over, but I do think their floor is probably more of a 9-8 rather than their floor being 10-7.
Yeah, I think this is a tough one you can go back and forth on. Um, they were aggressive in the offseason. We talked about all that. Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon, retaining Dalton Schultz and Nico Collins. It's a star-studded offense in an offensive league. They had to retool their defense to a certain degree. There are questions in the secondary, some big ones at that. They have Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson on the edge, so the pass rush should be pretty good. Um, the reasons you probably would take, the under. Number one, they rank 6th in run rate, or sorry, what I mentioned about the defensive line. If they're not as good against the run, that could lead to some problems. There's a loaded playoff picture and an improving division, which could cause some problems for them. Remember, last year, they still had to play down to week 18 to really solidify, winning the division.
Yeah.
And it took a pretty big implosion from the Jacksonville Jaguars down the stretch for that to be in play. So I think Jacksonville's going to be a good football team. We had them, I think, in our fringe playoff teams tier. Same thing with the Indianapolis Colts. Finished just one game ahead of those two teams. And the Colts were jumbling quarterbacks a year ago. I think their coach is fantastic. The division is tough, and quarterback matchups could cause a problem for Houston. They played the easiest schedule of quarterbacks and offenses last season. This season, they're projected to face the 10th hardest schedule of quarterbacks. So I think their defense needs to step up to the plate. But in the end, if CJ Stroud takes another step, he's protected well, and they have all these weapons, I think they'll win 10 games.
I agree. I think their running game and the offensive line, I think, is a key because we saw them go into 6 and 7 man protections last year a lot because of their struggles on the offensive line. And with 3 wide receivers this good, you want to be able to keep them on the field. So going into 6 and 7 man protections with this team would just feel like a win for the defense.
Yeah.
I think it would just be better if they were just able to stay in 11 personnel.
Yeah, I would agree. That's the Texans. Let's move on to our top 5. We're now into the top 5 people. And before we do that, make sure you check out some of our previous episodes in this series of 2024 NFL team previews. On our last episode, we got into this next tier of what we're calling Super Bowl threats. That's 8 through number 2 in our countdown. And then number 1 is kind of its own tier. So the Lions are in that tier, and they were another team kind of much like Houston, but not that drastically, took a big step in the right direction a year ago. So, Emmy, go ahead and give us the 2023 rundown on the Detroit Lions.
Well, I think with the way things ended in the NFC Championship last year, it would be easy to forget just how good this Detroit Lions team was last year. You were on it from the start. I got to give you credit for that. We have given you credit for that. I was more skeptical about their pass rush outside of Aiden Hutchinson, but that just didn't end up mattering. Just the fact that their offense was so good to the point where they could just walk out, roll the ball out there, and put up 35 a game and be like, outscore us. I dare you. And most teams couldn't do it. And I think Jared Goff, all the money he got this offseason, much deserved. Amon-Ra St. Brown, same, got big contract. But this is the point now where once you start paying guys, that's when the Super Bowl window usually caves in just a little bit. Because the more you start paying guys, the less guys you can pay down the line. So this is going to be a big year for them. I think they're squarely in the Super Bowl contender picture. I think a lot of people are picking them to reach the Super Bowl, and I can't really blame them. But last year, I mean, it was incredible. Just about as good of an offense as you're going to see in the NFL.
Yeah. You think about what this team was able to do a year ago offensively. They scored 250 points in the first half alone. And what was their recipe really for success a year ago? Their defense wasn't great. And we'll talk about that a lot in this segment. But they got out to a lead at halftime in 13 of their games last year, and they went 11-2 in those games. They were one of the best first half teams in football, just in getting out to fast starts. And, when you look at their offense, it was top 5 in pretty much almost every major analytical category. They were number 3 in total yards gained. They were number 3 in yards per play. They were number 5 in total points scored. They were number 5 in EPA per play. Um, you know, but they only won their games by an average of about 4 points per game. And that was because they were also great offensively in the fourth quarter of games. They scored the most points in the NFL in the fourth quarter of games. So this offense was great all around a year ago. Why did they have to be so perfect offensively in the fourth quarter, given how great they were in the first half? Well, their defense wasn't very good, and their third quarter offensive strategy and execution last year left a lot to be desired. So it's not that they don't have talent, some young talent on this defense. They went ahead and added more through the draft. But that was kind of their Achilles heel a year ago in a lot of different areas. But you mentioned it. Like I stood on the table for the Lions. You think back 2 years ago when they started 1-6 and ended up winning 9 games. When they started 1-6, we were kind of to a point where kind of unsure about how this whole Dan Campbell experiment was going to work out. And once they finished strong, won 9 games, we saw Jared Goff, really start to thrive in this offense under Ben Johnson, who's like a major part of this team as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And has gotten looks at head coaching jobs. I think it's a matter of time before he becomes a head coach because I think he's a brilliant offensive
He ultimately
mind.
just turned it down. It wasn't because he wasn't
Yeah.
working.
Yeah. They took off and they didn't stop last year. So I'm once again really high on the Lions. Again, it's the NFL. The NFC is better. Getting back to being, what was it, 30 minutes away from the Super Bowl is not going to be easy. That's why that loss is so painful from a year ago and just the way it went down in the NFC Championship game. But at the end of the day, like that was a massive year for this franchise. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So they won their first playoff game in over 30 years. I think it was like 32 years as of last year that they had not won a playoff game. So good for them. They have all pros everywhere. Penei Sewell at left tackle. Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of the top 10 receivers in football for my money. Sam Laporta emerged as a really good tight end. Jared Goff is under center. They have one of the league's best offensive lines still. So let's go ahead and just jump into what they did in the offseason because they made some moves. So why don't you start us off with some of your favorite acquisitions by the Lions?
Well, first, I got to shout out the DJ Reader pickup. He's coming off a big injury, which brought down his price tag quite a bit. I think they're getting him on a 1-year, $12 million deal, I think. He tore his quad, but it's an injury he's had before. And I actually just listened to an interview he did with the media the other day, and he seems very confident that he'll be able to come back and be the same player. But I think it's also just they'll be able to stop the run and they'll be able to let, Aiden Hutchinson do what he does. And then I love what they did in the secondary. They doubled down on corner, or really they tripled down on corner. Doubled down in the draft. They got Terrion Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw, and then in free agency got Carlton Davis as a veteran who I think raises the floor, because I think Terry Arnold was obviously the higher ceiling guy, but Carlton Davis, we know who he is in the league. He's been a solid corner for a long time, and I think bringing him in is well worthwhile. Let's see. I think that's about it. I did want to mention Davenport too. I talked about last
Yeah.
year a lot. The defensive end room opposite Aiden Hutchinson. I think if Marcus
Yep.
Davenport stays healthy, he can do what's needed on the other side.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'll add on to a lot of what you said. DJ Reader has to be on your list when you look at the Lions off season. He's probably number one for me. He's just going to help them in so many areas. And I get it, he's coming off an injury, but when you look at DJ Reader and his impact on that Cincinnati team, which I'll get to in a second, he's a menace in the trenches. He's very solid against the run. Um, he's going to help their run defense, which actually wasn't bad last year. It was actually kind of the strength of their defense. They were second in rushing yards allowed per game at 88.8. It was really their pass defense that struggled, which is why those secondary acquisitions are so important. But DJ Reader just makes their run defense all that much more stout. He generated pressure on 11.5% of his pass rush snaps last year. Think about this. The Bengals were the NFL's number one run defense against RBs with DJ Reader on the field the last 2 years. They were number one in yards per carry allowed at 3.6 and number one in EPA per rush when DJ Reader was on the field the last 2 years. When he was off the field, they were 32nd in yards per carry, 4.9 yards per carry allowed, and number 31 in EPA per rush. So that's right. The last 2 years, when DJ Reader was on the field, the Bengals were basically the best team in the league against the run. When he was off the field, they were basically the worst team in the league against the run based on those two metrics. So I think he's going to make a hell of an impact. And then you think about this pass defense a year ago. They were number 30 against the pass. 74% of all the yards gained against the Lions last year were passing yards. That was by far the number one highest rate in the NFL. They added young talent through the draft. I love adding Terry and Arnold. I love adding Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri. I think those additions will help right away. I don't know that either of those guys is guaranteed a starting job, but I think both of them will make impacts. I think one of them probably starts opposite Carlton Davis,
Yeah,
who,
it is looking like Terry and Arnold is a
yeah,
shoe in for that job as of right now.
yeah. But Carlton Davis was the big one. Um, he's a good player. And then you talked about, goodness, you talked about Marcus Davenport. On the offensive side, they did lose Jonah Jackson, who was a big piece of their offensive line. I liked going out and getting Kevin Zeitler to kind of fill that void. He's a little bit older. He doesn't have some of the, he's not as
Run
good,
blocking ability, I would say.
yeah, as Jonah Jackson, but he's a solid stopgap at that position for right now to keep that offensive line as one of the best in the league. So I think overall it was a really good offseason for Detroit. We'll just have to see. Their big loss was probably, who was their biggest loss?
Jonah Jackson, maybe?
Yeah, maybe they were
No,
forced.
it's probably more than that. I'm not thinking of.
They were forced to cut Cam Sutton due to some off the field issues, and then they obviously lose Josh Reynolds in their wide receiver
Right.
room.
Yeah, that is something to mention too. Their wide receiver room.
Yeah,
They like a lot of people are kind of forgetting about this. They still need Jameson Williams to break out here. Even
yeah,
more so now than they did last year, because last year they did have Reynolds, that could kind of shoulder some of that time when he was out without suspension.
Yeah.
But now that it's just Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples Jones behind those two lead guys, St. Brown and Williams. So this is the year where Williams needs to develop that chemistry with Jared Goff.
Yeah. That to me is a huge X factor. Reynolds, he had a couple key drops last year in the NFC title game, but
He
he's
was
been a
good the whole year.
yeah, he was a reliable number 2 receiver for 2+ years. Um, they're gonna need Jamison Williams, who, when he's touched the ball in his career, averages 16 yards per touch. So he's obviously a super explosive player, has that capability. But going into his third year, it's been a combination of some drop issues at times, injuries, and then obviously whatever else has gone on with him. He's going to need to stay on the field, and he needs to become the go-to guy on the outside with, Amon-Ra St. Brown, the way they move him around.
Right.
So he's kind of like, I kind of think of St. Brown as more of a slot receiver than like that dominant outside guy. So
Right.
I
Last thing, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
What do you make of this quarterback room behind Jared Goff? Because right now they have Nate Sudfeld as the backup, Hendon Hooker as the third guy. I don't feel that great about it because if Hendon Hooker is not at a point where he's winning that backup job, then I think there's reason to be concerned here.
Um, yeah, I'm not all too familiar about their quarterback situation, but I'd agree with you. Like, they don't want to lose Jared Goff. If they do, they're probably in a bad position. Um, Nate Sudfeld, don't really know too much about him.
Yeah, I think played at Indiana, kind of
Yeah,
has bounced around the league, but I don't think he's
yeah, I
not
don't
a
know.
guy you want to trust as your backup. I'll put it that way.
If it were me and they get to a situation where Jared Goff goes down, which we're obviously not hoping for,
Right. Yeah.
I would just throw in Hendon Hooker, see what he's got.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree.
Probably, he spent most of his rookie year rehabbing the ACL injury that he had at Tennessee, when he had that huge year a couple years ago at Tennessee under Josh Heupel. Um, just a devastating knee injury. It was non-contact, I believe. So he wasn't really a factor last year in this quarterback room, but this year I think if they get to one of those situations, just put the young guy in there and see what he's got. But obviously, if Jared Goff is healthy and they can figure out some things on the back end of their defense, I'm again, once again, really confident in what the Lions can accomplish. We have them ranked as, I mean, we're down to the top 5, so people kind of know what it is at this point. We have them ranked as the third best team in the NFC. You could probably guess who the two teams that we haven't talked about yet that are ahead of them. So kind of the place I think is right for them to be ranked. And the thing you have to mention though is you've got the Bears who are going to be better, and you've got the Packers looming big time. So
Yeah.
it should be a fun division. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing also too is if the Lions and Eagles were to play each other in the playoffs, like I feel pretty good at that. I feel pretty good about that if I'm Detroit because I feel like Dan Campbell in that coaching matchup has the edge for sure over Nick Sirianni, in my opinion.
Am I mistaken, or I think they did have an injury scare with Jahmyr Gibbs in training camp.
Yeah, he's listed on the injury report right here on this screen. Let me see
I
what
don't
this
think it. I don't think it ended up being anything too serious, which is good. But I do remember him
hamstring
going down
questionable
with something.
for week 1.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like Jalen Warren. Yeah, those hamstring injuries
Right.
are. You,
Yeah, you don't want
okay, well,
to bring him back too early on those types of things.
the running game will still be a strength of this football team, with
Right.
or without him. They have David Montgomery, a good offensive line. Real quick before we get into the projection for the Lions, they did, go out and spend some money to extend a couple of their best players. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he gets a 4-year extension worth $135 million, and then Penei Sewell, a 4-year extension worth $112 million. And they also extended Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, their general manager. So any thoughts on the Penei Sewell and or Amon-Ra St. Brown extensions, or do you think that's just well deserved? They should have gotten it.
Yeah, I feel deserved.
Anything?
I would have guessed Penei Sewell would get a little more than that. Given that
Yeah,
the top of the market tackles, Tunsil, um, not Smith, the guy in San Francisco, Brown. Those guys, they're making 27, 28 million. So I would have thought Sewell may enter the 30 million club, but I think it's a good for the Lions that he didn't.
yeah. It averages out to around 28 million a year. So you
Yeah,
keep them
that's
below
about
30 million. It's really
about the
the
market.
Amon-Ra St. Brown extension, which is interesting because 135 million over 4 years. That's almost 34 million per year. So I don't know. He's good. He's really good. Um, but that's a big time commitment to a wide receiver.
Right.
Okay, let's go ahead and jump right into projection. I think 10.5 is the number for Detroit. Is that what you have on your end?
Yeah, that's what I have here as well.
Um, Goodness, I feel like I've taken the over so much, but at the same
Yeah,
time, I'm really high on the Lions. Let's look here. Okay, do you have an answer in your head?
I mean, I gotta take the over, man. I mean, I I believe in Dan Campbell. I believe in this offense. I think the defense is gonna be better, and even if it doesn't show up in the numbers, because they're gonna play in some shootouts just based on how good their offense is. It's gonna force the other team's hand a little bit, but I think they're gonna be better on defense, particularly against the best teams in football, which is where you want to improve on defense. If they have a couple rough games here and there, it's like, so what? But I think they match up better now against a team like the Eagles or the Niners, where you got to have 3 or 4 good corners.
Yeah, they've got Terry and Arnold. They've got Brian Branch. They've got
Rakestraw, Davis,
Rakestraw.
Kirby Joseph in there as a
You know,
safety who can
a lot
cover.
of a lot of talent, no doubt. Um, they still have Ben Johnson, who I think is a key cog in calling this offense. When you look at last year, it wasn't like there was some ridiculous outlier that had a lot to do with their success. Like they weren't like outrageously, they didn't have an
Lucky.
outrageous turnover margin. They weren't benefiting a ton from fumble luck. There wasn't a whole lot of what you would call luck factored into their success last year. They were actually even in turnover margin last year. They were 28th in a metric called fumble luck. And I could argue that their pass rush underperformed. Only, 41 sacks a year ago. That's tied for 23rd. I think they can improve in that department.
And I think
Uh,
15 of those were Hutchinson.
yeah, exactly. I think adding Davenport will help to a degree. I think adding Reader
Yeah,
actually is going to
Reader
help that
like
too
pushing the
on the
pocket for
interior,
sure.
pushing the pocket. If they can just be, if they can go from bottom of the league to just like average in pass defense, this could be once again a team that goes and reaches the divisional round, maybe even the NFC Championship game again, and vies for a Super Bowl. Given how good I think their offense is,
Yeah, I
they're
mean,
facing
I
an
think there's a world where they win the Super Bowl.
yeah. That's why I have them in our top 5. They face an easier schedule of defenses this year. I have to go over. What did they win last year? They won. What did they go in the regular season? I think it was 10
I
and
think they
7,
went
right?
12 or 13 wins, I think.
Yeah, you're right. They went 12, I think. I don't know if I don't know if they'll get there again because the division's better, but I do think they'll get 11.
Yeah.
Who do you have winning the division? The Lions or Packers?
Oh, I'm picking the Lions. Um, and it's not like I have like a ton of questions on the Packers either. I think it's going to go down right till the end. Um,
Yeah.
do you have the schedule in front of you? What's the second? When is the second matchup between those two teams, and where is it?
So the first matchup is going to be the first weekend of November at Green Bay.
Okay.
And then the second matchup is going to be a month later, first week of December, um, in Detroit.
All right. So like week 13, 14 ish. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's going to be the game that decides the division.
Yeah.
But it still might come down to week 18 too. So
The Lions do get their bye relatively early this year. They get it week 5,
ooh.
which is like when most buys start. So it's going to be a grind after that. And it's not an easy road schedule. They got to play at Arizona in week 3, who could be much improved. They've got to play at Dallas. Dallas has been one of the best home teams in the league the last 3 years. A road game in division obviously is never easy. At Minnesota, at Green Bay, at Houston, at Indianapolis, at
At
San
Chicago.
Francisco later in the year. It's not an easy road schedule. But I still believe in this Lions team.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Well, those are our 2 teams for tonight. Emmy and I both taking the slight overs on both the Lions and the Texans. And so we're down to our top 4. So the way it'll likely work out is, let's see. So the season starts September 5th with Ravens and Chiefs. Let me look at a calendar here. So we have this next week, after this weekend, we're going to do teams number 4 and 3 in our countdown, I believe, on Tuesday is what we're planning as of now. And then likely next Sunday, so a week from Sunday, or the Tuesday, 2 days before the game, the first game, we'll be doing teams number 2 and number 1. So actually, with me going on vacation and some delays in the series, we're going to finish right on time. We planned it perfectly, even though we
Yep.
didn't actually plan anything. Okay. So I do have a couple, I guess I'm going to format them as buy or sell questions, but they might be better off formatted as not buy or sell questions, but we'll go with it. This was a question I actually stole from someone else. So I've been watching Hard Knocks. The Bears Hard Knocks is fantastic, by the way. So if you have HBO, I recommend getting it because they're a fascinating franchise. But anyways, speaking of rookie quarterbacks, of the rookies I've seen so far in the preseason that have already been named starters, it's Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels, I believe, have both been named starters week 1 for their respective teams, the Broncos and the Commanders. So my question to you is, I guess, buy or sell. Jaden Daniels in the Commanders will finish the season with more wins than Bo Nix in the Broncos. Buy or sell.
Ooh. Ooh.
I guess
Ooh.
it's really just a question of like who do you think wins more games?
Yeah, I think I'd go with Denver, but
Okay.
that's tough. That's really tough because Washington has a high ceiling. Because if Jaden Daniels is really good, they have the receiving core, and I think he's good enough to kind of maneuver a bad offensive line. And then the defense, I think, is just going to be okay. And then Denver, you look at the second half of last year. I mean, their defense was pretty good in the second half last year, and they were right there in terms of the playoff hunt. So if Bo Nix can be what Russell Wilson was last year, plus a little bit of throwing down the middle of the field, which is what he's good at. I mean, yeah, I think Denver can win 6 games, 7 games.
Okay, so you think so that tells me that if you think Denver is going to win 6 or 7 games, you think Washington is going to be worse than that. You think Washington's going to be like a 5,
Yeah,
6 win?
I think I see them right around the same range, but yeah, I think it's going to be.
Okay. For me, I think if see the thing is like if the Commanders had a better offensive line
Yeah,
because
I
their
would feel
offensive
great
line
about them if they did.
is a disaster. I would definitely take Daniels because I think he's just going to be so dynamic. I think
Yeah,
they'll be an interesting team to watch, but I would side with Denver. Bo Nix comes in with 61 college starts. He's looked fantastic in the preseason. He looks like an NFL veteran. I mean,
yeah,
really. I know it's preseason, but standing in the pocket, making quick decisions, really kind of remade himself at Oregon. I would side Denver, but it's close. I think
yeah.
it's pretty close. Um, okay. Let's see. What else do I want to ask you? Oh, not to be selfish here, but there's a lot of consternation about the Steelers quarterback competition, I guess, if you want to call it that. It's kind of it's been uninspiring the first 2 weeks. But buy or sell. I don't know if I should say you disagree or you agree. I'll just go with you agree with a lot of these national pundits that you would start Justin Fields week 1 over Russell Wilson.
No, I disagree.
You disagree?
Um,
Okay.
I Here's the thing with Justin Fields, man. He's still not seeing the field that well. Um, and like you got to give it time. You got to give it time. And like that's the thing that he wasn't afforded in Chicago, but there's still time for him. He's still young. If you give him that time now, I feel like maybe he'll find it and he'll be able to like just be a little bit more comfortable in the pocket. Like there's
Yeah.
still times where he's just not letting it rip, you know? There's open receivers down the field. He's not letting that throw go.
Yeah. Um, I agree. I think you stay with Russell um, week 1 against Atlanta. The real thing I want to see tomorrow in the preseason for Pittsburgh is better offensive line play because it was rough last week. Any buy
Yeah.
or sells for me, or any like NFL questions that you can think of
Well,
for
on the
me
offensive
before we
line
wrap this
thing,
thing?
Broderick Jones at right tackle, I think that's not really, I don't think that's the move. I think he's a little more comfortable at left tackle. Buy or sell? Let's see. Okay. Let's talk about rookie wide receivers for a second. Okay. Out of the second round wide receivers, right? Keon Coleman, A.D. Mitchell, Lad McConkey, and obviously there was a few more, but I'll just name those three. Which of those three do you feel best about being the most productive in year one?
Well, first of all, I did want to mention I agree with you on the Broderick Jones comment, but right now the Steelers are kind of forced into that situation because of Troy Fautano's injury.
Ooh,
And so Dan Moore's never played right tackle, so he's playing left tackle, and Jones is playing right tackle. It's not good for his development because he's a natural left tackle, but I don't
Father's
know if
not
they're
good.
throwing him over there to because they want him over there. I think it's more out of necessity for the Faltano injury.
Yeah,
On the
gotcha.
rookie
I didn't know that
receivers,
part.
on the rookie receivers, remind me where's Lad McConkey? He's with
With the Chargers.
the Chargers. Most productive. You said most productive, so like we're talking
Mhm.
about
Yards, touchdowns,
touchdowns,
receptions.
receptions. Um, I think Lad McConkey will have an opportunity to probably potentially lead that group in receptions, just because I don't view the Chargers receiving depth as deep as say the Colts or the Bills. I think those teams have more options, spread the ball around. But if I have to pick a receiver to be the most productive overall out of that group, I think I would go with A.D. Mitchell.
Hmm.
That's just my feel on it. Do you have an
Yeah.
opinion?
Um, I think I would lean Lad McConkey, but I think it's close between him and Mitchell. I still got to see it with Coleman.
Yeah, so do
It's an
I.
interesting fit there, and he's put into the X receiver role, and I kind of liked him as more of a big slot, to be honest. And it
Yeah.
just seems like they have a million slot receivers already, so he's just kind of forced outside. I don't know. It's a weird situation.
Yeah, and he's had a rough preseason. Um,
Yeah,
so
not an indictment, but it's not a great sign either.
yeah. Anything else for me? Or is that it?
Ooh, yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, that wraps it up at just about an hour. So we're right on time. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe. Tell your friends about us. Likes, we really appreciate. It helps our algorithm. It helps recommend these videos to people so that we can try to get more subscribers. Again, I think the goal should be 100 plus subscribers by the end of, I don't even want to say by the end of football season, because technically the end of football season's February. And I want to have 100 subscribers way before then. But
Yeah,
like,
end of calendar year maybe.
yeah, end of calendar year for sure. Look, we're not trying to get huge, but we do want a good community that likes our content, that engages more with us, and that we can talk sports with. So make sure you like and subscribe. Go check out these Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports episodes that we've recorded. We'll have more content coming Sunday night, and then it's football season, ladies and gentlemen. So there will be days occasionally where we have to push an episode back a day because of a someone has a conflict,
Yeah.
me or Emmy. But for the most part, it'll be a consistent Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule. And really, this week is the last week of like preview content this upcoming week.
Right. We'll be able to talk
But
some real football.
yeah, but enjoy if you are not doing anything tomorrow. College game day at 8 a.m. in Dublin, Ireland. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry to drag this on, but did you see Pat McAfee on the Pat McAfee show today?
What did he do? God.
If you haven't seen it, I recommend just go on Twitter. He was
Okay.
he was shit faced on air. He was I think it
How
was
does Disney employ this guy?
100 milligram edible. He was drinking Irish beers. I think he threw up on the air. Yeah, he's shit faced, and he's got to do college game day tomorrow morning. So
Wow. Yeah.
Shout out Pat McAfee and Nick Saban, who was sitting right next to him, who will also be on the college game day crew this year. And enjoy Florida State, Georgia Tech. And shout out Nevada, who plays SMU tomorrow, I believe, tomorrow night. They've got a bunch of Longhorn transfers that I'll be watching. Savion Red, Keaton Crawford, Jeff Choate, the Texas former linebackers coach, is their head coach now. So go to Nevada Wolfpack, I guess, if you will. And then we'll kick off next week with Colorado and North Dakota State on Thursday night. So it's going to be a fun football season. But until then, until Sunday night, and until tomorrow night for the recruiting show, my name is Michael Ween. He's Emmy Nixon, and we'll see you next